Hey, financial advisors. Thank you so much for joining me today to talk about how advisors out there are going independent and transitioning to the RIA model. And I'm so excited to have our special expert guest, Brad Wales of Transition to RIA. Brad, thanks for joining us and talk us through a little bit about your background and what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, thanks, Claire. Appreciate you having me on today. So, quick background: my firm Transition to RIA. Pretty descriptive of what I do. I help advisors, as I say, understand everything there is to know about why and then how to transition to the model. So first, you have to understand, why might I do this, and then to the degree that is a good fit. Okay, how do I go about doing that? And what both you and I do, Claire, certainly overlaps, because a big part, a fun part of that launch in your own firm is really putting your vision and making that practice, and it's that marketing piece that puts you out there. So super happy to be here. I think we'll have a great conversation.
Awesome. Let's jump right into it. All right, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Claire Aiken with Indigo Marketing Agency, and today I'm super excited to have Brad Wales here as an expert guest, and we are going to talk about how advisors are transitioning to RIAs and the common questions that advisors like you may have on the process. So let me just back up and give you a little bit about my story. So a lot of you know me. I'm Claire Aiken. I run the Indigo Marketing Agency. And what I do is I help independent financial advisors with their business and marketing strategies to grow their firms. And I'm a former investment advisor with LPL Financial. And I also serve about 165 top independent advisor clients, not only helping them with their marketing, but also helping them to grow their business. And sometimes growing your business and growing your marketing can be supported by going with an RIA model, because a lot of times that gives you more marketing options and it has the added ability to grow your business a little bit faster. And so that's why this topic is of interest to me. And that's why I've asked Brad to join us today. And so Brad, why don't you walk us through a little bit about your story and why you're passionate about this topic?
Sure. And thanks, Claire, for having me on. Happy to go through the conversation today. I do echo kind of your comments there, and we'll get into all of this and how the RA model just gives one of the benefits of it is the added flexibility to do a lot of what you talk about, with Indigo, and then the options of how to position yourself in the marketplace and your business development efforts. So obviously, I'm passionate about the RA space. That's entirely what I'm focused on. I specifically run a firm called Transition to RIA. Where I help advisors that want to learn more about the model, and then to the degree they think it's a good fit for them, how do they actually go about transitioning into that model. So quick backstory on me: just under 20 years in the industry, about half that amount of time directly in the RIA space. Did a number of different roles in compliance, finance, and business development, all to do with the RIA space. Most recently worked for a custodian, and I was out telling the RA story in that role, and then explaining that particular custodial option. And part of what led me to leave and to start my own firm was just having the independence, which is kind of a similar theme to why a lot of advisors themselves go independent. Is while the custodial option I was supporting, is a great solution for some advisors, it's not a solution for all advisors. And I just felt kind of constrained when that was the only thing I could help advisors with. And I realized if I went, independent and started my own firm, I could help advisors and be agnostic no matter what path they want to go down. So that's what led me to start and transition to RIA, and happy to walk folks through the topic here today.
Right. And I totally agree with you. There's just something about independence. And the reason why I work with independent financial advisors is not only because we can do their marketing in a more interesting and compelling way, but it's because I believe that they offer a better value. It's, something about the free market economy and being able to offer your clients the best options that are out there and not have your hands tied. And so there's a lot of reasons advisors would want to go independent and to go towards an RIA model. And so we're going to talk about those today. So walk us through kind of, what are the trends you're seeing? Why do advisors want to transition to an RIA?
Sure. And I talk to a lot of advisors. And so part of the interesting part of playing that kind of role is I hear a lot of different perspectives. And so there's a lot of different, pain points. People might be kind of trying to move away from something, or they're trying to move towards something where they feel they can better excel, or just have a practice that's more in line with where they want to go with it. And so it does range all over the place of, why advisors might want to transition to the RA model. But the kind of two biggest themes, if you will, that generally resonate across the spectrum, and you hear this a lot, so it's kind of high level, and through part of the presentation here, we'll dive into some of these, but the economics of the model, and then the flexibility you have. So a quick thought on the economics, and we'll get into a little later exactly kind of, how that looks on a day-to-day basis, but both with, your ability to generate a compensation level under your own RIA that perhaps you're not able to reach that level under your current affiliation model. And then of course, one day, your succession event, your liquidity event, and how those economics are generally superior as well on the RIA front. So there's a lot of attraction just on the economics alone to the RIA model. And I would tell you, it's not a super simple answer. You hear one of the benefits, which is accurate, is there's a 100% payout. And that is correct. And that sounds wonderful. Obviously you have expenses to go with that. So you got to kind of work through those details to see how it shakes out for each individual advisor situation. And then the other one is flexibility. So we kind of already talked about that. Whether it's with marketing, whether it's with the clients you choose to serve, whether it's with the products and solutions you want to be able to offer your clients, it just is what it is. It's not a knock on other advisor affiliation options, but when you're your own RIA, you are just going to have the most flexibility of which of those products and services you want to offer your clients, how you want to market those services to the investing public. And then the kind of third part of that, which goes back to the economics, is how in turn you want to be compensated for that. And we all have to play within certain rules of the industry. So it's not necessarily a free for all by any means, but generally speaking, when you can set your own approach to these things, you generally always have much more flexibility than if you're in a more kind of captive, large firm type environment.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so the keys I'm hearing from you are really that you can, hopefully earn more money from your book of business if in a perfect world, if everything aligns and you control your expenses and whatnot, but also that you can build a more valuable firm. So, we're all going to exit our careers eventually, and advisors out there work so hard for their clients. They want to own their book of business and they want to get as much as possible when they eventually go to exit. So yeah, I think it's a great option. And I'm seeing a lot of interest on this topic lately. So talk to us just kind of about the different paths that advisors are taking along this journey to go to a true independent RIA model.
Sure, and I like how you said that at the end there, the RA model. So if you look at my website, I generally try to, I'm not perfect, but I generally try to always refer to, transition into the RA model. The name of my firm is not how to start your own RIA, and what I mean by that is there's a couple different paths that people might realize is the best solution for them to go down to get into the RIA model. So for some advisors, that is indeed starting their own RIA in building that out and using someone like me to help them understand how that works, and all the different vendors that support you in that effort is certainly one path advisors go down. There's kind of three paths here. The second one is advisors that say, hey, I do want to have my own RIA. I do like what it could do for me from the economics, flexibility, all that fun stuff. I don't like the idea of some of the back office operational aspects to it. So the second option is you start your own RIA, but you work with commonly referred to as middle office or back office providers that take a lot of that operational tasks off your hands for you, and you kind of effectively outsource that to them. Mm-hmm. And then the third option is to join an existing RIA. And, sometimes folks, kind of discard that right out of the gate. And I say, well, hey, take a look at what the options are out there, because there are essentially firms that have built out very good value propositions for that advisor that not only doesn't want to have that operational kind of responsibility, kind of wants to take it even a step further, and maybe doesn't even want the compliance responsibility or just the the overall, business ownership responsibility, but still wants the upside with the economics and still wants the flexibility. And so it's not to say that any one of those three paths is better than the other. They're unique, they're different, and for each advisor, I always suggest, hey, let's talk through each of these. And some might be real quick, that's not for me or not, but I think it's important for advisors to understand what they are and why they might be a good fit or not for them.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I know that if I ever, went back to being an advisor, that I would take that third path of joining an existing RIA who has a great team, a great cultural fit, a great, marketing, philosophy. So I think, it's definitely worth looking at that third option of joining something, not reinventing the wheel, and finding the right fit with you in an existing RIA firm. So yeah, three big options there. Talk to us about how long this process typically takes. So, a lot of people are kind of reinventing their business in 2020 in a virtual world. If I were to start today and I were an advisor with, one of the bigger firms, how long until I'm truly on my own?
Yeah, and it is all over the board. I would tell you, I talked to some folks and they underestimate. They think this sort of thing can be done relatively quickly, and then other folks think, oh, I should. It takes 2 years of planning to do this sort of thing, and there's all kinds of reasons advisors may or may not want to do something in the near term versus longer term. And quite frankly, I mean, I even hear feedback where someone says, absolutely, I want to become an RIA. Absolutely, this is the path I want to go down. But the reality is my youngest child has 2 years left in college, and I'm just, that's my task at hand. And I once that's done, then I move on to this next kind of, step in life of starting my own firm. So sometimes the timing has to do with actual logistics involved in it. And then other things, it's personal factors. But it's kind of, as far as what that answer is, it really comes down to, first you have to pick which of those three paths. Because quite frankly, in reverse order, the third path is perhaps the quickest because you don't have to go out and start up the actual RIA itself. You don't have to put in a lot of the policies and procedures and advisory agreements and all those sorts of things. And then on the other end of the spectrum, because you are building that out yourself, and there's absolutely pros and cons to both approaches, you are going to need a little more time to put all that together. So just as an example, even if you decided today, I absolutely want to have, for instance, you're going to go down the path and you're going to have your own RIA, and I've already decided on what vendors I want to work with, and I'm ready to pull the trigger and actually legally start the RIA. That process alone, as an example, generally takes 45 to 90 days. So even if you've done everything else, just the actual process of starting the RIA is 45 to 90 days. And again, there's a lot of pre-planning that goes into that. So a lot of what I encourage advisors is, even if an advisor says, oh, I'm probably 12 months away from making a move if I'm gonna make a move, and I say, well, you should start the conversation now, because time will escape you, because there's a lot of education on the front end to know how all these options work, to know all the logistics, to know all the steps involved, and just understanding all of that first is going to take some time before you even start reaching those actual hard time limits, such as actually starting up your RA, or Claire, working with a firm like yours, the lead time involved, and okay, we'd like to engage you and have you help us with our market. And obviously there's time involved in that as well. So time will quickly escape an advisor in the process. And that's why I say it doesn't hurt to start sooner than later, even if you think your horizon is far off into the distance.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And from a marketing perspective, this is one of the things that we specialize in, is helping advisors launch a new firm, whether it be, a DBA or an RIA. But there is a lot of thought that goes into, who are your ideal clients? Who do you serve best? What is the problem that you're solving for them? How do you want to position your firm? What do you want your website to look like? What's the content that we're going to create for you? How should we brand your social media profiles? This whole process is something that we like to have at least 90 days to work on to do it correctly. So definitely, the earlier the better when it comes to planning for this kind of a launch. So walk us through, what does the process look like? Say I've been thinking for about a year about, maybe one of these options. What are the next steps advisors need to take?
I think that so the first step is deciding on which path is best for you. And so whether that's talking to someone like me to have you help you understand what those paths are, or you've already done the due diligence on your own, um, until you figure out that step, you don't know, you can't figure that what the next step should be, because again, they're going to be dictated by which of those paths you go down. So after you do confirm that, then it's a matter of figuring out, okay, what vendors do I need to work with out there? So as an example, if you're going to join an existing RIA, there's some vendors you don't perhaps need to worry about at all, such as the folks that are going to help you with compliance, because that RIA has inevitably already got that step in the process, figured out. If you're starting your own RIA and you need to put compliance in place, or you need to put marketing in place, again, the next step is just literally understanding and identifying all the vendors involved, whether it's compliance, marketing, the custodian you're going to use, the technology you're going to use. There's a whole host of things that I think it's important advisors just understand in general. And then from there, then you start looking at, okay, for each of these vendors, who are the key players out there, and why might I choose one over the other? And even that process takes a little while to kind of do your due diligence on these folks. And Claire, as you just said, even if someone does go down those 3 steps and then does decide to work with Indigo, even then you need 90 days. So again, the process does take some time. I'm not trying to paint that in any negative sort of light, just trying to be realistic of how this works. And it's just a matter of kind of almost going through the funnel. At the top of the funnel, you have every option under the sun, and then you kind of start narrowing based on what you want to do with your practice and what direction you want to go with, and it kind of guides you as to who all you should be working with. So there are lots of steps, nothing to be intimidated about. Literally thousands of advisors have gone through this process, but it is a process nonetheless.
Yep, absolutely. And just to the advisors listening out there, Brad and I are going to do a follow-up webinar to this one that talks about what you need to do from a marketing perspective once you decide to launch a new firm. And so we'll talk about everything from, doing your logo, to getting your website ready to go, to clarifying your focus, doing your social media profiles, your, creating your marketing calendar, all of these things that are important in establishing your brand and telling the story and reaching out to new people. So yeah, it's a complicated process, and that's why Brad is a great resource for advisors out there, is to have somebody to help you through this process and to make sure that you're identifying all of the important steps and considering all the important factors for you. So let's talk about kind of the elephant in the room of the expenses. I know this is a key reason that advisors want to go with an RIA model, is the financial aspect. And so talk to us about the upfront expenses.
Sure, and it is absolutely relevant. Before I dive in that, I'll just add a note on to your last thought there about that marketing process. I would tell you that is one of the more fun parts of the whole process, because that's where things really start to come alive. And that's where, something that you've probably as an advisor long, envisioned of the ideal practice you'd like to have and the ideal clients you'd like to serve and how you want to position it all. And working with Claire and her team is where that comes alive and you actually start seeing it. And so while it seems, wow, there's a lot of steps, a lot of work, you will get absolutely energized going through that, because that is really where these things start to come alive. So I just wanted to add that on that point. So upfront expenses, it is what it is. If you, especially if you start your own RIA, again, if you join an existing one, the expenses will be less. But if you start your own RIA, you are starting your own business. And just like any business you're starting, there are startup costs associated with that. Both in hard costs, literally whether it's building out an office or engaging the vendors to help you with certain things. And then to be fair, during any sort of transition, you will see a temporary lull in your cash flow as you move the accounts over before you start billing on the fees again. So that's fair to consider as well. But the analogy I use is starting your own RIA, starting your own business is kind of like refinancing a mortgage. And for those that have done it, and quite a few people have, so you're quite familiar with this, you have closing costs, and those closing costs are, usually thousands of dollars. And, a normal part of that exercise is you calculate out, okay, well, how much interest am I going to save over the coming years? And then generally, the break even on that to, that saved interest over each monthly payment going forward, might take you 2-3 years to recoup that initial upfront closing cost to refinancing the mortgage. But of course, after you reach that break even point, it's just net positive to you in perpetuity going forward. And so that's the same with starting your own firm. I'm not going to deny that you need to be prepared for startup costs there, and there absolutely are startup costs. And it might even take you a year or two, depending on the math and the size of your practice and those sorts of things, to kind of reach the proverbial, back to break even point. But unless you're only planning on doing this for the next 1-2 years, you got to look at that long-term plan, just like refinancing a mortgage. If you were going to move in 2 years, you shouldn't refinance the mortgage. It's not worth your trouble. If you're going to be in that house for 5, 10, 15, maybe 20 years, it absolutely will be worth that upfront investment in the long term. So yes, upfront expenses. I couldn't give you some dollar amount because every single situation is different of how an advisor wants to build out their practice or whether they want to join an existing practice. And so I'm not trying to dodge the question, but literally those are so unique that every advisor I talk to, it's a series of questions we have to kind of think through together to try to even start piecing that together.
Yeah, well, that's a great analogy. I love that refinance analogy. And most advisors out there are looking at this, that this is their career. And I bet a lot of advisors that you work with probably wish they had made this transition earlier and that they could, start reaping the rewards and building their business the way they want to sooner. And so you talk about these upfront costs, but are there financing options? They're going to have a lull in their, payouts. They're going to have to purchase different, marketing materials and go through all these upfront investments. What are the financing options?
Sure. And so right alongside that, there's kind of day one costs, if you will, and then even, over those first couple months from a cash flow perspective. And so kind of straight out of the gate, I will absolutely, and one thing I pride myself on is being a straight shooter and just telling it how it is. There are no, the proverbial upfront checks, upfront recruiting checks, upfront bonus checks, whatever you want to call them, in the RIA model. That does not exist. Quite simply, the economics of it for instance, a custodian to be able to let you retain 100% of your advisory fee as you do, the math simply says, okay, we can't give you that big upfront check. Now, I would argue, and I actually did a whole video on this on my website, that again, you got to look at the whole lifetime of your practice, and generally actually taking that big check's actually not the better option for you when you look at the aggregate lifetime of your practice. But nonetheless, you still have that, effective day one hurdle of expenses to overcome. And so while there's not the traditional transition assistance check or whatever you want to call it, there are solutions out there. So depends on what path you go down. Again, that's why all these answers are, back to the steps. You got to first figure out that first step, whether you're going to start your own RA and work with a custodian, work with a middle office provider, or join an existing RA. There are a couple opportunities on financing options. Some firms are able to provide some degree of upfront assistance, and to be clear, it is nowhere near what the wirehouse to wirehouse transition checks are, again, because of the economics of it. However, there is generally some assistance that can help you. It's usually not necessarily always in the form of cash payments, but where it could be used towards the actual soft and hard costs of starting the business. So that's one option. Another option is there are some unique and creative solutions being offered now, where some of these providers will do things like help you monetize perhaps 10% of your book on day one with a cash event, and then that's essentially paid back to the provider over a period of time. And then that point forward, you still own your equity, but you were able to kind of get some liquidity upfront to help you with some of those costs. So again, there's some unique solutions there. And then final on the lending piece, there are specialty lenders out there as well that is their focus is working with advisors and being able to provide lending assistance. And as opposed to, a mortgage where you're putting your house up as collateral, a lot of these loans are structured. The collateral is the cash flows of your practice itself. So you're not having to sign over, your mortgage or anything like that to get access to those lending sources. So again, each situation is unique, but there's definitely opportunity out there to help with that, upfront expense if needed.
That's great. Yeah. And I always tell advisors, if you're going to hire a marketing firm, you definitely want to hire somebody that's familiar with our industry. And the same thing with a lender. You definitely want to go with somebody who's familiar with financial services, that is going to value your business correctly and be able to, put together a loan for you based on your business model. And so let's talk about how much an advisor's income can change when they kind of go towards an RIA model. This is obviously a big driver, for a lot of people, and it's one of the main reasons, people start thinking about this option. But break it down for us. What is the reality here?
Sure. So and I will give you some numbers. I'm not gonna dodge this one with some generic answer as well, because this is a very important one. I would preface it though by saying one of the benefits, absolute benefits of the independent space and having your own firm is that you set your cost structure. So if you want to have the fanciest office on the 30th floor building of your downtown, that's going to be one expense level. Or if you're perfectly fine with a more modest office space, on a ground floor setting, that's going to be a different cost structure. So there's no one specific answer. I'll give you a range, but again, the beauty of the independent model is that you have absolute control over that. And I've seen everything. I've seen very elaborate, very fancy offices that do have a high cost structure. And then I've seen some RAs that are extraordinarily efficient, if you will. Literally, it could be a solo practitioner with maybe one staff person and a modest office at that. And those aren't necessarily small RAs. I've seen that, well over 100 million that's operated in that capacity. So to each their own of how they want to set it up. But the way I always frame it is a reasonably run, reasonably sized. So I know that's, a little generic, but again, assuming you don't go swinging hard one way or the other on expenses, and you do have some size to some scale to you. It is hard, if you're 20 million, that's certainly going to be a lot different conversation than if you have $400 million of how these numbers look. But generally you can expect to net, as they say, before owner's compensation in the 60 to 70% range is fairly typical, again, for a reasonably run, reasonably sized RIA. And I would challenge you on that, not only to mentally consider that versus what you are receiving now, but I also, in conversation with advisors, in almost every instance, when I'm walking an advisor through this conversation, I say, well, how much are you generating now? What's your take home? And they inevitably quote the grid rate that they're at their, if you're at a wirehouse firm, I'm 44% or whatnot. And I did a whole video on this because I think it's important that there's a lot of factors that probably reduce that more than you're realizing, whether it's just you're not paid on certain accounts under a certain size. You get penalized if you reduce the client's advisory fee, and that lowers your compensation. And so not only consider, oh, wow, what I'm making now versus 60 to 70%, I'd really challenge you to make sure you're even calculating your own take home correctly now. It all too often, it tends to be lower than I think what advisors initially either think or want it to be, because it's easy just to quote that grid rate. But usually if that was all you had to do, then your comp plan would be 1 page long. And there's a reason comp plans seem to be 20 plus pages long, because there's a lot of nuances to it. So just some food for thought on how you kind of evaluate that comparison.
Yeah, you really want to take into account the effective rate. And then is this something that you help advisors with? Do you help them to kind of do a evaluation of, what their compensation might be compared with what it is now?
Yeah, so I just gave kind of a pretty high level answer there. And like I said, generally speaking, that 60 to 70% range is where it's at. But just like everything, everything's so advisor specific. Again, how extravagant do you want your practice to be? What kind of services do you want to offer? How much, by the way, now with your own RA, you have a multitude of additional ways you can potentially set up your compensation structure that maybe you didn't have available to you before. So let's consider how that might look on a post-launch basis and what that might do to your income. So that's absolutely a conversation I walk through with advisors because again, every situation is unique. So happy to walk anyone through that wants to.
Yeah, well, we appreciate the hard numbers. I know it's always a kind of a it depends answer, but this is, what people want to know and what people are wondering. So, yeah. So then the next kind of headwind to this process is compliance. You obviously compliance is an incredibly important topic. We need to make sure that we're doing our business in a compliant way. So, what are the options for advisors in tackling compliance?
This is this will sound weird. This is actually one of my favorite questions, and you think, okay, of all the exciting things to talk about the RA model, what compliance is seemingly certainly not one of them. But the reason I say that is, a lot of what I hear is, oh gosh, aren't I going to have to pay for my own compliance now, or now I'm going to be responsible for my own compliance, and particularly with having to pay for it, and that is oftentimes used by existing, maybe an employee firm that is trying to talk one of their advisors out from maybe considering a path to independence. Oh, you're going to have to pay for your own compliance. And I always point out, Mr. or Mrs. Advisor, keep in mind, you are absolutely already paying for compliance. And right now, you're paying for compliance at your firm. It just happens to be bundled into your payout. So as opposed to seeing a itemized bill for all of your expenses as you would in the RA world. And yes, on that itemized bill would be this new line for compliance that you've never had to see before. You're effectively where you are paying for it. It just happens to be bundled into one, particular bill. And so I always say, don't look past the fact you're already paying for it. And then not only that, I would challenge you to consider, are you not only paying for it, are you paying for more compliance than you even need? And so I'll give an example, and this is just one example. It's a basic example, but there's a lot of compliance and cost associated with firms to be able to accommodate, for instance, foreign clients. So if you want to have clients in other countries, there's all kinds of anti-money laundering and know your customer responsibilities there. And so large firms, any firm, has to build out these big compliance apparatuses to do this. And something has to pay for that. So if you are one of those advisors and you have almost all foreign clients, well, hey, that's not a problem at all. If you don't have any foreign clients, I would challenge you to say, well, keep in mind, you are helping contribute to that compliance function, and you're not even using that part of compliance. Whereas with your own RA, yes, you have to pay for it, but one, you only pay for what you actually need, and then you have much more to control over to how to structure it so it only adheres to the specifics of your particular practice. So compliance comes up in almost every conversation I have, in almost every instance when I help folks kind of think through how I just described it, they see it in a different light.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more with you on this point because as a marketing firm that works with advisors in a lot of different compliance capacities, I see the same type of article go through very, very different compliance processes where you have an RIA who maybe acts as their own chief compliance officer and can approve an article with, just by writing back to an email saying this is approved. Or you have, an advisor with a larger RIA that has to send it off to the compliance person who can approve it. Or you have one of these big firms where it takes 3 or 4 days and multiple rounds of edits to get something approved. It's like, you start thinking that these compliance officers really want to keep their jobs. And so they invent work to do and it becomes an uphill battle. And then it starts keeping advisors from doing their marketing because it's such a headache to deal with the compliance officers. And so I think that the compliance result is about the same on all of these different models, but it can be very, very challenging for advisors that are not independent, to the point that some of them don't have websites, some of them don't do any marketing, they do no social media. And so you want your compliance team to be on your side. You want them to be working for you, and you don't want to be spending more than you have to have multiple iterations of compliance causing a headwind for your business. And so I totally agree with you on that point that, going independent and having an RIA where compliance works for you in a cost-effective way is really a good thing for advisors out there. So, you see a lot of advisors go through this process. Talk to us about the key mistakes that they're making and some of these considerations that they need to avoid before they go through the process.
Sure. So I'll give you two that I kind of come across that are pretty big ones. So the first is, and this is admittedly a little self-serving for me to point out, because part of my value proposition is kind of being an independent source that could help you find out which path to go down. And so a challenge is if you go, or a mistake, if you will, is if your first point of contact when you're trying to learn more about this model is to reach out to a particular solution, whether that's an existing RA or a custodian or a back office provider or things like that. And absolutely nothing against those folks. I literally was one of those folks prior at a custodian. The challenge is if that's your first step, is one, those folks are only going to be experts per se on their one solution. Now they're not naive to the other solutions, but the thing they're going to be most familiar with is the solution that they can provide. And then quite frankly, they're tasked with helping advisors into that solution. So that's clearly what they are going to position things as. And I think, and there's very respectable people out there, very knowledgeable people out there that will certainly try to shoot as straight as they can. I tell you, I just myself, from my own experience, I struggled with that. I joke I wasn't particularly good at the role because, if an advisor had a profile that was a good fit for what I was offering, that was fantastic. But if it didn't, and I knew one of these other paths or one of these other firms they could be working with was perhaps better for them, that wasn't my job in that capacity to send them elsewhere. My job was to try to make it work in that solution. And so again, it's self-serving to point out because that's what I provide for people. But for starting that conversation with someone like me that can independently walk you down these paths, and I'm not bound to any one path or solution, I think is a big help. And then the other thing I would point out, in Claire, you might see some of this when I'd love you to comment when you first start talking to particularly maybe breakaway advisors, and I experienced this myself with my own business. So I was in a corporate environment, not as a financial advisor, but as an employee for roughly 20 years. And when I broke free, that was a change for me. And I joke that it's a Shawshank Redemption moment. Much to my wife's chagrin, I watch that movie every time it comes on. But in that movie, for anyone that's familiar with it, they talk about the characters at one point talk about being institutionalized and how when they, in their case, when they get out of jail and you think, wow, now you have freedom. And it actually takes them a while to adapt and to be able to accept that new freedom. And I experienced that. There are things you just can and can't do when you're an employee of a large firm, whether how I wanted to literally market personally myself out there in the marketplace and things like that. And then when I broke free myself and started my own firm, it actually took me a while. I would catch myself at times like, wow, I can't do that. And then realize, no, I can. And so, for instance, just doing this webinar with you, Claire, I absolutely could not do that before, or at least had to ask someone's permission. And so with advisors, I would just challenge you as well to absolutely be open-minded that, if you've been with a large wirehouse firm your entire career, and that's not any knock on those firms, it's just a particular structure, and there's particular policies and procedures they have to put in place, that there's a lot of stuff you maybe haven't been able to do, for instance, from a marketing perspective, and you haven't been able to, put yourself out there in the local community and certain things like that. And And I would just challenge you to don't let yourself be institutionalized with your mindset of what is possible, and to be open-minded, and whether to talk to someone like Claire and her team and say, okay, if I didn't have any handcuffs and this is what I wanted to do, could I do all this? And again, don't hold yourself back just because that's all you've ever known. So I don't know, if Claire, if you've encountered that as well, of a kind of a newfound freedom for people to adapt to.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think it goes both ways. And that's a great analogy. So my dad went independent back in 1979 when it was just the infancy of the idea of an independent advisor. And my mom says that he pretty much played tennis and golf for the entire first year because he could. And so, it's my brother was born a year later and he had to get to work and build his business. But it also takes some time management. It can be very overwhelming for advisors having to juggle running their business, doing their marketing, doing their compliance. Everything is on their shoulders where they used to have a lot of support. It can be a little bit socially isolating to not have a big team around you helping you. And so, yeah, it's definitely an adjustment. It's a culture shock, like you mentioned. And one of the other things that I will mention just about the biggest mistakes that I see advisors making is, and tell me if you agree on this, is, don't go with the firm that's going to give you the highest payout percentage, or, take the lowest fee from you, because it really does vary. Different RIAs give you different levels of support to grow your business. And so you're not just looking for the best financial deal. You want to look for the right cultural fit. You want to work with a firm that's going to help you in a way that will help you grow your firm and set it up for the long haul. And so just looking at the financials, I think, is another mistake that advisors can be a little bit prone to.
Yeah, I'd agree. And there is no perfect solution. There is no, you can't ask someone like me or whoever and say, Brad, what is the absolute best custodian that's going to give me maybe the most support on the front end, and charge me the lowest fees and have the most access to products, or whatever the case is. Every solution has pros and cons. It's just trying to find which one is the best fit. And so, to your point, I think it's excellent, is you can't pick any one metric and that's the only thing that is your guide and light on that decision.
Great. Yeah. And so talk to us about, what can advisors do to be more successful as they're starting this journey? And I think, any advisor listening to this, I think you're doing the right thing, getting educated at the outset before it's too late. So what are some of the tips that you have for advisors to make this a successful journey?
I think the biggest one is literally just educating yourself. As an example, and this is a kind of conversation I have all the time. If as an advisor, maybe you've been an advisor for 20 years, 30 years, Claire, your dad's 37, I think you said. You can be a wonderful advisor and you can run circles around someone like myself as far as the best advice to give. For retirement planning and how to withdraw money and spend it down. You will absolutely run circles around someone like myself. However, if during that 20-year career, 30-year career, you've only, for the most part, maybe ever known one model or maybe two models, that just because you've been an advisor and you might be an excellent advisor doesn't necessarily make you an expert at the logistics of another model. And that's no slight on you. It's just, hey, until you dip that toe to learn more about it, how would you know? That's not your day to day. And so, it kind of comes back to, is the grass greener? And I do encourage advisors, it doesn't hurt at all to spend a little time to at least better understand the option. And at the end of the day, the RIA model is not for everyone. I have no illusions to think that, this is the perfect solution for everyone, because it's not. There are profiles of advisors, and I have no hesitation to tell them, to be honest, considering your situation, you're probably better off not going down this path. So I'm not claiming it's for everyone, but for a lot of advisors, it is. And until and if you dip that proverbial toe and take a look, how can you ever know if it's the better solution for you? And this is your career. This is your livelihood. This will be one day an asset that you will hopefully be able to sell to complement your long-term wealth. And I think you just owe it to yourself to find that out. And I'll give you an example. Just yesterday, I had a first call with an advisor, found me on my website, watched my videos, reached out, him and his team scheduled a call with me, and it was scheduled for an hour. And this was the first first kind of let's get to understand this RA model. The hour call went 2.5 hours. Now, thankfully, it worked out that my schedule didn't have a hard stop at that point. Neither did his. But it was just all so new to him, and he was just so interested and kept firing off questions. And I think that's just a perfect example that hey, until you dip a toe. And for all I know, he might have thought that call was going to go 20 minutes. And here we are 2.5 hours later. And of course, they don't all work out that way. But I do encourage you, at least educate yourself, learn more about it. Maybe it's for you, maybe it's not. It doesn't hurt to at least understand it better.
That's great. And I think it's such a great service that you offer advisors to truly educate them from an independent position and tell them, what they need to know. And so, speaking of having a call with you, if there's advisors listening that have questions about their specific situation, how do they learn more? How do they get in touch with you? And do you offer a free call, or what is your setup there?
Sure. So the absolute best thing you can do is to head on over to my website, transition2ria.com. Again, that's transition2, spelled T-O, RIA.com. To be honest, I could give you my email address here. I could give you my phone number. It's all on the website. But the reason I'd rather you just go to the website first is I try to have built out a very educational resource. So you'll see on that website, I have over 30 plus videos I've made about all different kind of aspects of how the RA model works. I have white papers. I ask or answer a lot of questions. And so I think it's just a great starting point that you can dip that first toe if you want to say, hey, I'd like to learn a little more before I maybe commit to a conversation with Brad. And I think you'll discover there's a lot of information there. And then most advisors do follow up by scheduling that call with me. So you'll see in multiple places on the website there. And if you can't find it, I haven't done a good job with it. So I'm confident you'll find it. I happen to call them discovery calls. Where it's literally, you can click on a link instantly through my schedule and link, set a specific date and time, and literally we'll get on a call together. And some advisors come to those calls with very specific questions they've already mapped out, and we just start firing away. And then other times, kind of like yesterday, the advisor comes and says, I keep hearing about this RA model. I don't know if it's for me. Talk to me more, Brad. And 2.5 hours later, we're still talking. So happy to connect with you on that. Again, if you go to transition2ria.com, you can find out everything.
That's great. Yeah. And we appreciate you offering that to advisors. And Brad's site is fantastic. One of the first things I noticed when we met is I went to your site and I was so impressed with your marketing because you are doing everything that I recommend advisors do. So you have a totally clear niche of who you serve and how you help them. You have tons of content that gives away very laser focused, relevant informational, videos, articles, white papers, and then you offer a very clear next step that's an easy next step for people to take. So advisors, when you do go to Brad's site, just make a note of the marketing because that's exactly the type of marketing that we try to get advisors to do. And, if you are going to, start thinking about this process of doing your own RIA or joining an RIA or, launching a new firm, we do help advisors along that process. And we're going to have a follow-up webinar to this one. I will link to it below. You can sign up and you can learn what are the key components of branding your firm, of launching a new site, of launching a new brand, social media profiles, content creation. What's the cadence with which you should communicate the change to your clients? What should you say to your existing clients? How should you deal with those conversations? How can you, start to position your business to grow, even though it's a new baby that people maybe don't trust yet? And so we'll talk through all those options on the next webinar. But Brad, I just want to thank you so much for your time and for your expertise. And advisors out there, I will link to Brad's site where you can look at his videos and schedule a call with him. Thank you so much for watching, and thanks for being a part of this webinar.